Let's talk about the essay titled On the Use and Abuse of History for Life by Nietzsche, published in Untimely Meditations. Nietzsche argues that the fundamental purpose of history should be for life, and as we live, we must understand our past without becoming enslaved to it. In this essay, he talks about the unhistorical mind, superhistorical being, and optimistic historical beings. Then he goes on to describe the three approaches to history: monumentalism, antiquarianism, and criticism. We are going to focus on these three approaches in this video. No single approach is the right one. Each can be used in combination and at an appropriate time and context. If misused, however, destructive weeds will sprout and pull society down into chaos. Now let's talk about the first approach, that is monumentalist. The monumentalists are on a historical search for glory. This can be a dangerous exercise, for if the past is viewed as something that can be imitated and reinterpreted into something more beautiful, then it can easily fall into a trap of free poeticizing by people serving up mythic fictions to weakly cultured nations craving hope and direction. In a prophetic peering into the Third Reich, Nietzsche warns that the monumentalists are most dangerous as superhistorical people when they are not anchored to a particular place. When saturated in a myth of cultural superiority and lacking in geopolitical boundaries, less favored races and people roam around looking for something better in foreign places, and competition and warfare ensues. While such thinking in the past has fueled foreign adventurism and destructive wars, the monumentalists today are more concerned about a nativist agenda on their home turf. Chants by the alt-right like "Our Blood, Our Soil" and campaigns against cultural Marxism taking over the world stem from a stubbornly anchored place and people who believe their white European derived race is being diluted by the other, who belong on the other side of the fence. Okay, so now let's talk about the second approach, that is the antiquarian. The antiquarian, like the monumentalist, tends to look at history through rose-colored glasses, but wants to preserve the past in a traditionalist and literalist sense rather than use history to generate life. Man envelops himself in a moldy smell and steeps himself so deeply in the past that he will take little interest in what lies beyond the horizon. The modern jihadist drawn to the Islamic State banner can be seen through this lens. Believing that return to a 7th century Islamic way of life will restore virtue in man and glory to the Islamic world. The third approach to history that Nietzsche describes is the critical one. He writes that a person must have the power to break with the past in order to live. This, he argues, can be done by dragging the past before a court of justice to look at history with a critical eye. In describing a first and second nature, he describes how a generation that looks at its past and can recognize its ills alongside its virtues sets the stage for the next generation to study its past with a healthier, more critical view of history, and thus society is better off in the long run. In this thought, Nietzsche may have been a tad idealistic. In reality, as we can see today, several decades is long enough to bear down the critical eye and blur our historical memory for the worse. Nietzsche would also see the jumbled historical references feeding into today's political discourse as a gross abuse of history, warning of much bigger problems ahead. In every camp of monumentalists and superhistorians, there are some whose egos and visions are so big that they believe that the entire passage of history is to serve their modern agenda. Nietzsche saw this type in his day as well. Arrogant European of the 19th century, you are raving. Your knowledge does not complete nature, but only kills your own. For once, measure your height as a knower against your depth as a person who can do something. Of course, you clamber on the solar ray of knowledge upward towards heaven, but you also climb downward to chaos. In fact, chaos is exactly what many modern-day radical monumentalists are seeking. If one assumes an apocalyptic view of the world, as many among the alt-right and some within a rapidly thinning camp of ultranationalists, then their energy and focus will be on tearing down the current order at whatever cost to energize the masses to engage in their so-called revolution. To complete this aim, enemies need to be invented, the intelligentsia needs to be condemned, and history needs to be revised. And whether they know it or not, the motto of the modern-day monumentalist, in Nietzsche's words, will be the following: let the dead bury the living.